I grew up carrying a last name that felt more like a weight than a gift. Carter. In our family, that name was treated like a legacy carved in stone, one my father guarded with fierce pride. He was a retired Navy captain who believed honor came only in one form, through medals, titles, and the loud kind of victories people could applaud. My older brother Henry fit that mold perfectly. He was confident, charming, and always presented as the family's future. I, on the other hand, was quiet, bookish, and too often dismissed as someone who simply pushed papers. That dismissal came in countless small ways. At family barbecues, my father would raise his glass to toast Henry's promotions or new achievements. When the attention turned to me, the words grew softer, almost apologetic, as if my accomplishments needed an excuse. Once, after I received a major scholarship, his only response was, "That's nice, honey, but remember to find someone who can take care of you." I laughed it off in front of others, but later, alone in my room, the sting stayed with me. Recognition mattered even if I didn't want to admit it. And yet, life has a strange way of teaching us that being overlooked can hold its own kind of power. Without the spotlight, you learn to build strength in quieter places. For me, that meant dedicating myself to study, to discipline, to the kind of work that didn't bring applause at dinner tables, but changed the course of lives at sea. I watched others chase approval while I chased competence. And over time, that quiet path gave me skills, resilience, and an ability to command in places my family could never imagine. The truth is, many people know what it feels like to be invisible in their own families. Maybe you worked long hours while a sibling's smaller victories got celebrated. Maybe you quietly carried responsibilities while someone else soaked in praise. It hurts because family is supposed to be the place where we are most seen. But here's the lesson I slowly learned. Not being noticed does not mean you are not valuable. Sometimes it means you're cultivating a strength no one else can see until the right moment arrives. That realization changed everything for me. Looking back now, I can see how those years of invisibility shaped my resolve. They taught me that my worth would never come from a father's toast or a neighbor's approval, but from the integrity of my choices and the courage of my actions. And though I didn't know it yet, those choices were leading me toward a moment when the quiet daughter in the background would finally step into the light. That's where my story truly begins, at a family dinner that changed the direction of everything. The engagement dinner was meant to be a celebration, but for me, it felt like a quiet trial. The table was long polished mahogany, set with silverware that gleamed under soft chandelier light. Henry and his fiancée sat glowing at the center while my father held court at the head. He told story after story of Henry's accomplishments and sales, shaping him into a hero in front of our relatives. The laughter rose, glasses clinked, and when the spotlight inevitably turned toward me, the warmth in his eyes cooled as if I were an unwelcome interruption to his performance. "Just promise me, Evelyn," he said in a voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, "don't bore the guests at the wedding with talk about your paperwork. This day is for real achievement." The words sliced cleaner than any knife on the table. I smiled politely, pushing food around my plate, but inside I felt the weight of years pressing down. It wasn't about that night alone, it was the ledger of slights, the missed science fairs, the brushed-off scholarships, the constant reminder that quiet victories never counted in his book. Many people can relate to this moment. Maybe you've sat through a holiday dinner where your efforts went unnoticed, while another relative was praised endlessly. Maybe your success was laughed off as trivial, even though it cost you sweat and sacrifice. The truth is, families sometimes use humor or comparison as a shield, not realizing the hurt they cause. In America, we're taught to celebrate independence. Yet at the dinner table, many still feel chained by invisible roles. Those jokes that draw laughter often leave one person carrying silent scars that linger long after the dishes are cleared. What I came to understand later is that these moments, while painful, can hold unexpected lessons. That dinner taught me the difference between recognition and validation. Recognition comes from others, it's loud, public, and fleeting. Validation, on the other hand, must come from within. It's quieter, steadier, and doesn't crumble when applause fades. My father's words hurt, but they also clarified something vital. My sense of worth couldn't depend on whether he acknowledged my path. I had to find a way to anchor it in something deeper and more lasting. Still, in that moment, I didn't argue back. I didn't demand respect or storm away from the table. I simply nodded almost imperceptibly, as if to say, I hear you. But this will not break me. What he didn't realize was that his words had crystallized my resolve. That night, something inside shifted from longing for approval to quietly preparing for a reckoning. I didn't yet know how it would happen, but I knew the stage was being set. And soon another family gathering, a July barbecue, would push me even further toward that breaking point. The 4th of July barbecue had always been my father's stage. Neighbors gathered, the smell of propane and grilled corn drifted across the yard, and patriotic flags lined the fence as if the backyard itself was enlisted in his personal navy. That year the energy was electric because Henry had just been promoted to regional vice president. My father puffed up like a proud commander, telling anyone within earshot that his son was destined for greatness. He spoke of sales conferences as though they were military campaigns. Each laugh and nod from the crowd wrapped Henry tighter in borrowed glory. I stood on the edges, sipping lemonade, still adjusting from my own world of 48-hour leave after months at sea. The noise felt overwhelming after nights spent with nothing but the hum of radar and the crash of waves. Yet I carried news that mattered. I had just been selected to command a carrier strike group, one of the most significant responsibilities the Navy could give. When I shared it, hoping for even a flicker of pride, my father gave a distracted pat on my arm. "That's nice, honey," he muttered, eyes already searching for someone else to entertain. In that instant, I realized something profound. Even achievements that shook the foundation of my career could be brushed aside if they didn't fit his narrow definition of success. Many people know this feeling, working tirelessly for recognition, only to be dismissed with a casual phrase. Maybe it's a promotion waved off as lucky timing, or a personal goal treated as insignificant compared to someone else's. The sting is sharp because it isn't just about that moment. It is about years of trying to be seen, only to be invisible again. That was the lesson pressed into me that day. My mother tried to soften the blow, as she always did. She pulled me aside near the shed, whispered that Mark's life is here, on land. It feels more real to your father. Her voice was gentle, but her words carried the weight of resignation. She meant to comfort, but in truth she reinforced the same hierarchy. Don't rock the boat. Let Henry have the spotlight. It reminded me that sometimes silence can wound as much as cruelty. Families often uphold old patterns, not out of malice, but out of fear of conflict. Yet the cost is a daughter left unseen. Walking back through the yard, I felt a clarity I hadn't known before. I couldn't change him. I couldn't rewrite the script he clung to so tightly. But I could write my own. That barbecue wasn't just another disappointment, it was a turning point, the moment I stopped waiting for validation and started preparing to prove myself in a language my father could not ignore. And the place where that language rang loudest was not in a backyard, but in the steel heart of a warship, where decisions meant life or death. That's where my resolve truly found its home. Inside the steel belly of the USS Roosevelt, the air was cooler, quieter, and heavy with responsibility. This was my true home, the flag bridge where walls hummed with electronics and blue light from tactical screens painted every face. Here titles weren't symbolic. They were functional, earned in sleepless nights and split-second decisions. I was no longer the quiet daughter sitting at the edge of barbecues. I was Commander Evelyn Carter, entrusted with the lives of thousands. The rhythm of the ship, the steady reports from officers felt more natural than any family dinner I had ever attended. One July afternoon during a freedom of navigation exercise, the stillness broke. With a report, an unidentified destroyer shadowed us, ignoring hails. The red blip on the screen crept closer, threatening to ignite an international incident. My flag lieutenant, seasoned and steady, awaited my call. Panic was an indulgence I couldn't afford. My voice, calm but firm, carried through the room as I ordered: maintain course, acknowledge hold, de-escalation posture. For 10 tense minutes, the air thickened until finally the destroyer veered off. Relief washed silently over the bridge, but respect gleamed in the eyes around me. Moments like this shaped me far more than any toast or dismissal back home. Out here, trust wasn't given because of a last name. It was earned in the clarity of decisions that could mean peace or war. Many people may never stand on a warship, but they know the feeling being tested in high-stakes moments, where others look to you for direction. It might be running a hospital shift, teaching a classroom of restless students, or guiding a team through crisis. Leadership is rarely glamorous. It's quiet, steady, and it proves itself in pressure. The lesson I carried from those steel walls was simple: real authority doesn't need validation, it speaks through action. My father clung to medals and memories, but authority in the present is lived, not inherited. In civilian life, I've seen parallels everywhere. A boss who demands respect without earning it often fails, while a leader who shows calm and fairness wins loyalty without raising their voice. The bridge taught me that silence paired with steady resolve can command more than 1,000 speeches. Respect born from competence has a weight no family hierarchy can erase. And yet every victory at sea carried a quiet echo of longing. I wish sometimes that my father could see me as these men and women did, not as clerical Evelyn, but as a leader whose decisions mattered. But I also knew he never would. His world measured value differently. That realization crystallized into a plan. If he respected only rank and ceremony, then I would use that language to make him finally listen. I didn't seek revenge, I sought correction. That decision, first born in silence on the Roosevelt, would set the stage for the operation I was about to launch my brother's wedding day. After that summer, something inside me shifted. I stopped wishing my father would change and began planning how I would. For years I had approached him with emotion, hoping he'd finally see my worth. But emotion was never the language he spoke. He believed only in hierarchy and rank, invisible markers of power. So I decided I would meet him in that arena, but not on his terms. Not through desperate pleas or heated arguments, but through undeniable proof that I had already built something far greater than the legacy he imagined. It was a quiet, precise resolve. I remember sitting at my Pentagon office late one night, the sterile silence wrapping around me like armor. The polished desk reflected classified files, maps, and secure lines blinking softly. It was a world of strategy and facts, not emotions. And as I stared at those screens, I realized I had been fighting the wrong battle for years. Recognition at home would never come through vulnerability. It would only come by showing them what they couldn't ignore. In many ways, this wasn't just a family struggle. It mirrored how women in uniform often fight for respect in male-dominated fields. Think about it: how many times in everyday life do people waste energy trying to persuade those who never intended to listen? Employees trying to please bosses who refuse to value them. Children chasing approval from parents stuck in outdated beliefs. We pour energy into softening hearts that may never open when instead we could redirect that strength into building something undeniable. I had spent years trying to fix a ledger that was never balanced in my favor. Now I saw the truth: the only record that mattered was the one my actions wrote. The lesson here is sharp but freeing. Sometimes you have to stop chasing approval and start building authority in your own way. In civilian life, that might mean leaving a dismissive workplace and creating a business that thrives. It might mean finding a circle of friends who recognize your worth when family doesn't. For me, it meant shifting from trying to win my father's affection to crafting a demonstration of reality. Not revenge, not pettiness, just a public correction that would speak in the only language he respected: military hierarchy. And I knew exactly where this moment would unfold. That's when the idea took shape. My brother's wedding was approaching a stage my father had been preparing for years, where he would once again crown Henry the heir of the Carter name. But this time I would not stand in the shadows. The plan was simple in design, but immense in impact. I would bring someone with me, someone whose presence alone would recalibrate the entire room. This wasn't about applause, it was about fact. The wedding would no longer be his stage. It would be mine. And the man I had in mind was no ordinary guest. When the wedding invitation arrived, crisp and formal, I studied it like an operations order. The +1 space wasn't just a courtesy, it was an opening. My father expected me to bring some polite guest, maybe a faceless date he could dismiss with a joke. Instead, I decided to bring a presence impossible to ignore: Admiral Hayes. He was more than a mentor. He was the man who had once entrusted me with missions that never saw daylight, but shaped the balance of power in the Gulf. His very name carried a weight my father could never match. Inviting him wasn't an act of revenge, but a calculated correction. I called one evening, my voice formal, almost ceremonial. "Sir, it would be an honor if you would attend my brother's wedding as my guest." There was a pause on the line, the kind that stretched with unspoken understanding. "Evelyn," he said, I know exactly why you're asking. And yes, I'll be there. In that moment, the plan was sealed. This wasn't about humiliating my father, it was about exposing the truth, not just to him but to everyone who had watched his stories and believed them. It made me think of how often people let others define their stories. At work, I've seen brilliant colleagues passed over while louder voices took the credit. In families, I've seen children labeled the quiet one or the irresponsible one, titles that stick for years no matter how untrue. We forget that those labels are fragile when met with undeniable evidence. The lesson I learned was simple. Sometimes the most powerful rebuttal is not a speech, but a fact that stands in the room silent and irrefutable. Admiral Hayes was going to be that fact for me. Of course there were risks. My father's circle would be filled with retired captains and old Navy friends who still saw him as a charismatic leader. I knew that bringing someone of Hayes' stature into that environment could shift the balance sharply, but I also knew that nothing else would pierce that fortress of nostalgia. It's like trying to change a workplace culture. You can talk endlessly, but until someone respected by all steps in the system doesn't move. This wasn't about starting a fight. It was about planting a truth so undeniable that silence could no longer cover it. As the wedding day drew closer, I felt strangely calm. It wasn't the jittery nerves of a family gathering, but the steady readiness before a mission. I had tried emotion, tried waiting, tried silence. None of it worked. Now the blueprint was set. My father would raise his glass as he always did, convinced of his narrative. And then with one introduction, that narrative would collapse under its own weight. The stage was ready not for revenge, but for revelation. What I didn't yet know was just how powerful that moment of unveiling would be. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble, the kind of place my father adored. He moved through the room like a king in his court, his old Navy friends gathered around, their laughter echoing as he retold embellished stories from decades past. Henry and his bride glowed at the center, every detail, designed to reinforce the Carter family's proud image. I sat quietly with Admiral Hayes, my presence unremarkable to most. To my father, I was background decor, useful only as contrast to Henry's shine, but I was calm because I knew what was about to unfold. When the moment came, my father stood glass in hand, his cheeks flushed with champagne and self-satisfaction. He launched into a speech about Henry's brilliance, describing regional sales as if they were decisive battles. The crowd chuckled dutifully, his words painting Henry as the heir of all Carter legacies. Then, as if following a well-rehearsed script, he turned the spotlight on me. And my daughter Evelyn, he announced, voice dripping with mock sympathy. She pushes papers for the government. Not glamorous, but someone has to do it. A few guests laughed nervously, unsure whether to join his joke. For a split second, the humiliation pressed down like it always had. But instead of shrinking, I studied the faces around me. I saw pity, confusion, even discomfort. It struck me then mocking others may draw quick laughter, but it rarely draws lasting respect. In workplaces, I've seen leaders who belittle their teams lose credibility the moment they step away. Families are no different. People might chuckle out of obligation, but deep down, everyone remembers who uplifted and who humiliated. That night, I realized my father's cruelty wasn't just hurting me. It was quietly corroding his own authority. The lesson was clear: when people try to diminish you, they're often revealing more about their own insecurity than your worth. My father's need to elevate Henry at my expense spoke volumes about his fragile pride. And in life, we all face versions of this: colleagues who undermine us in meetings, relatives who belittle achievements. They don't understand peers who dismiss quiet success. The trick isn't to fight their words head-on, but to let truth reveal itself. Respect built on reality will outlast applause built on exaggeration. My father didn't know it yet, but his stage was about to collapse. As the silence thickened after his cruel toast, the air seemed to hang still, waiting. And that's when Admiral Hayes rose from his chair. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, but his presence shifted the gravity of the entire room. Conversations died. Mid-sentence forks froze halfway to mouths. My father was still smiling, oblivious, until he realized every eye had moved away from him. Hayes looked directly at me, then spoke with the quiet authority of a man who carried fleets behind his words. That was the moment when the room itself began to change. Admiral Hayes rose with deliberate calm, his chair scraping softly against the polished floor. He wasn't just standing, he was commanding the room without a single order. Eyes followed him instinctively, even those of men long retired from the Navy. He glanced past my father's frozen smile and locked his gaze on me. "Pardon me," he said evenly, his voice carrying more weight than any microphone. "Are you Admiral Evelyn Carter, call sign Valkyrie?" The words landed like thunder in that ballroom. Suddenly the girl dismissed as a clerk was revealed for who she truly was. Silence gripped every corner. The ripple effect was immediate. My father's old Navy friends straightened unconsciously, habits of protocol resurfacing after years of retirement. One captain whispered, 4 stars. My God, she's full command. Faces paled, forks paused mid-air. For them, the name Valkyrie wasn't casual. It was legend whispered in intelligence briefings about operations that never reached the evening news. And now that figure wasn't an untouchable myth, it was me sitting quietly at the edge of the room. The man my father tried to dismiss as my +1 had just detonated the truth for everyone to see. In that instant, I understood something deeper about respect. It cannot be manufactured by stories or demanded by titles alone. True respect surfaces when reality and reputation align. My father had spent years inflating Henry's achievements into myths, while diminishing mine into footnotes. But reality has a way of shining through, and once revealed, it cannot be stuffed back into the shadows. I've seen the same truth in workplaces. Leaders who exaggerate their importance eventually falter, while those who quietly deliver results are recognized when it matters most. Reality always outranks rhetoric. The lesson here is powerful silence can carry more force than any argument when paired with undeniable truth. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to defend myself against decades of jokes. All it took was standing steady while facts spoke louder than words. In life, whether at a family table or in a boardroom, sometimes the most effective response to dismissal is patience paired with evidence. When your work or your character becomes undeniable, others will shift their gaze without you demanding it. And that shift can change everything, just as it did in that room. As I met Admiral Hayes' steady eyes and answered clearly, "Yes, Admiral, I am the last thread of my father's authority unraveled." The ballroom no longer revolved around him, it revolved around the truth he had refused to acknowledge. My father slumped into his chair, pale and speechless, while Henry's glow dimmed into confusion. And me, I didn't feel triumph, only clarity. This wasn't revenge, it was revelation. The balance had shifted, and nothing could return to how it was before. But what came after the fallout, the ripples through family and friends, was still waiting to unfold. The silence that followed my words stretched long enough to feel physical, like a curtain being pulled back. My father sat motionless, his face drained of color, the smirk that once felt permanent, gone without a trace. The glass in his hand trembled, spilling a few drops of champagne onto his sleeve. For the first time in my life, he had no story to tell, no correction to make. He was a ghost at his own son's wedding, eclipsed by a truth he could neither challenge nor rewrite. The shift in power was not loud, but it was absolute. Henry stood frozen beside his new wife, unsure whether to offer a toast or to disappear into the crowd. His golden aura dimmed under the weight of revelation. Guests avoided his gaze, their eyes instead flicking toward me and Admiral Hayes. One by one, my father's Navy friends approached, not to console him, but to extend their hands toward me. Their faces, once familiar with casual smiles, were now formal, even reverent. Admiral 1 said carefully, waiting for my nod before touching my hand. Respect once hoarded by my father had been irrevocably transferred in a single evening. In those interactions, I realized something powerful about human nature. People gravitate toward authenticity once it's revealed. For years they had tolerated my father's grand stories, because they were convenient, comfortable, even entertaining. But when confronted with reality, their allegiance shifted effortlessly. It reminded me of offices I've worked in, where the loudest voice dominated until competence walked quietly into the room. Authentic authority changes the gravity of every conversation. The lesson here is sharp people may follow charisma for a while, but when truth finally enters, it commands a loyalty that performance can never sustain. I accepted their gestures with grace, but also distance. This moment wasn't about basking in recognition. It was about closing a chapter that had defined me for too long. I thought of others who live under labels. They never chose the shy one, the failure, the weak link. When those labels are finally broken, the freedom feels less like celebration and more like relief. My advice is this: when you prove yourself, do it not to shame others, but to liberate yourself from their shadow. Triumph without bitterness leaves you stronger, not smaller. That night, I felt exactly that. When Hayes and I left the ballroom early, slipping into the cool night air, I didn't look back. My father remained inside, silent, diminished, still staring at his plate. The wedding continued without him at its center. Walking away, I realized this wasn't just about a single night, it was about a lifetime. But the true transformation would come later, when my career placed me in rooms far more consequential than any family gathering. What had shifted here was only the beginning, the spark that would ignite a new understanding of who I truly was meant to be. A year after that wedding, my world felt like an entirely different country. No chandeliers or stage speeches, just the soundproof walls of the Pentagon, where decisions carried real weight. I stood at the head of a table, surrounded by the Secretary of the Navy, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Directors of Intelligence. Here, no one called me clerical Evelyn. Here, my analysis directed fleets, and my judgment shaped policy. Respect was not demanded or dramatized. It was earned decision by decision. And for the first time, I felt not invisible, but essential, exactly where I belonged. Looking back, the journey made sense in ways it never did while I was living it. The dismissals at family dinners, the sting of being overlooked, the quiet humiliations, all of them carved out a resilience that prepared me for greater responsibility. My father's obsession with hierarchy blinded him to the truth: rank means nothing if not backed by competence. And that night at the wedding, competence finally outranked performance. If there's one lesson that carries through it all, it's this: your true worth does not vanish in the shadows, just because others fail to see it. Many of you may know this struggle personally. Perhaps you've worked tirelessly, only to have someone else soak up the recognition. Perhaps you've been labeled unfairly in your family, your workplace, or your community. It hurts because we all long to be seen. But take heart in this: the truth has its own gravity. In time, reality cannot be denied. The quiet worker becomes the steady leader. The underestimated child becomes the resilient adult. Just like in my story, your patience, your strength, your unseen victories, they are not wasted. They are building your own undeniable legacy. The real takeaway is this: stop waiting for the approval of those who refuse to see you. Build your life, your craft, your leadership in such a way that when the truth comes to light, it speaks louder than any defense ever could. Don't let bitterness harden you, let purpose guide you. When you reach that moment of revelation, it won't feel like revenge. It will feel like freedom. And freedom after years of silence is worth more than applause. My father never truly apologized, but he didn't need to. I had already moved beyond the need for his permission. So if you've ever felt invisible, remember, you are not alone. Share your own story in the comments, because this is a community where voices matter, where expertise and experiences are valued. If this journey resonated with you, I invite you to like this video, subscribe for more stories of resilience and redemption, and pass it along to someone who needs the reminder that their worth is real. Together, we can rewrite the legacies we inherit into the legacies we deserve. And maybe, just maybe, help someone else find the courage to step into their own light.